Hi, my name is Lindy Jung and welcome back to the channel. So I was not planning on filming a video today because I already kind of put out a video this week, but I was just sort of galvanized to talk about this particular piece of writing craft that I love, that I personally could do endlessly, but that I've just sort of started to realize that other people might struggle with. It's one of those things where I was just like so in my head that I was like, oh, I love doing this. Surely everyone loves doing this. But of course that is not always the case, especially when it comes to writing. So this is a question that came up in the writing Discord server that I started pretty recently. Everyone is welcome to join, all experience levels, so I will link that below. We're really just like a friendly and supportive community talking about all sorts of topics. It's pretty active and it's a lot of fun so far. And this was raised by Chris MF, whose channel I will link below. She also does amazing writing videos and vlogs, and I just love her content so much. Today's video is going to be about writing character descriptions. Personally, I love all things involving character writing, especially when it comes to character descriptions. It's something I've not actually thought a lot about actively, so I sat down and thought through my process and like looked back at some of my work and tried to figure out what I try to do and what works for me. And really my advice usually boils down to two things, which I will expand upon in this video. Of course, the usual caveats apply. Prescriptivist writing advice is for the birds. We do not do that here. These tips and tricks may not work for you, and that is totally fine. Everyone's writing is different. Everyone's process and preferences are different, and I'm just presenting what works for me in a way that I hope will be helpful for some people, but I know won't be helpful for everyone. That being said, if you have your own advice for writing effective character description, then feel free to drop them in the comments below. Your advice could be the spark that helps another writer on their journey, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump right into the video. Part 1 is going to be the traits of good character description. In my mind, good character description is actually a misnomer. What I really mean when I say good character description is effective character description. The goal of all character description, of all description in general, is to create an image, or start to create an image in the reader's mind of this person. You want to make sure they have a solid idea of what they look like physically, but also start to form an idea of their internal traits as well. You also want to write this in an interesting and engaging way. All of this can be really tricky to balance, especially in the flow of an existing plot. Like if you're introducing a character later in Act 1 or in Act 2 or even Act 3, then basically you are setting aside a paragraph or multiple paragraphs to talk about this person and try to convince the reader that they're relevant in some way. That means that you don't necessarily want to info dump someone's like height, weight, eye color, hair color, star sign, etc. But you want to paint a clear enough picture of this person so that the reader can retain them in their head going forward. The question is, how do we balance these needs? So if you're a writer, you probably already have some sort of character description on the page. Even if it's something as rote as, like I said, just their hair color, eye color, skin color, that is something to work with. I will talk a little bit more about that method later down the line, but I want to give you guys some advice on how to make sure that the character descriptions you're putting on the page are basically effective and work and balance these needs. My first piece of advice is going to be making sure the character enters the scene with impact. One of my top tips, and something that I mentioned in the Discord chat, is that I always want to make sure that the characters are leaving a lasting impact on the other characters in the scene as well as the reader. First impressions truly are everything, especially when it comes to reading, especially if you have a larger cast. Some ways you can make sure a character has a lasting impact are by making sure the character has some sort of memorable detail about them, such as a physical trait, a habit, just some little tidbit or quirk that you can throw out there and is weird enough that it catches the reader's eye. Of course, you don't want to go too far with this if you're just like sprinkling quirky traits onto characters left and right, or throwing them on for no particular reason, or if the trait is like just not relevant, if it's like a hobby or skill in particular, then this can come off as pretty annoying and also very cheap, so you want to be careful about this one. Another way to leave a lasting impression is to make sure that the character plays a distinct role in the conflict of the scene at hand. So this is also one that's sort of vague. This can be something as simple as the character brings in a weapon or trips up the bad guy. I'm thinking physical conflict, but it also rings true for emotional conflict. There's a bunch of different ways you can play around with this, but making sure that they have a direct role and influence on the conflict of the scene is a really good way to make sure that the character stands out and isn't just a bystander. Also, having a character say a distinctive first line, again, you want to be careful about the cheapness or cheesiness, especially corniness here. You can be corny on purpose, of course, like if a character's main trait is that they're corny, they can absolutely come in with like a movie quote or something kind of ridiculous, and that can stand out as well. Like, characters can also leave a bad first impression. I want to make that clear right here. Another one that is a little bit harder to describe is to make sure that the character creates a lasting impression on the narrator. So for example, even if the character doesn't necessarily have anything that maybe stands out to the reader, they have some sort of trait that instantly connects them to the main character or the narrator. For example, seeing someone that looks like a deceased loved one, or who looks like the person that they've been chasing, or who represents something to them. Some sort of instant tie like that. In a similar vein, you can always introduce characters who have some sort of pre-existing relationship with the established characters. I think this is a really, really effective one. And the closer the established relationship is, the more likely they are to stick in the reader's mind. I think this also works really, really well if the character sort of comes out of left field, and a lot of the details of the relationship with an established character are sort of a mystery, and the reader is invited to unravel that over time. That's something I've been doing kind of heavily with mods. And again, sort of playing off of that, another way to make sure that a character leaves a lasting impression is to make sure that they invite questions from the reader. This can be either because of their connection to an established character as mentioned, or their role in the plot, or just like, why are they here? What are they doing? What are they up to? If it's very clear that a character has strong goals, but they're not gonna let you know the exact motivation behind their goals or the exact end game of their goals, that's going to invite intrigue, that's going to be interesting. Okay, final note is that having a character stand out in some way upon introduction is a way to signal to the reader that they will be relevant to the story in some way moving forward, or relevant to the character's backstory, just relevant to the story in some way. That being said, you're not going to want to make every character with a speaking role or a line or some sort of small minute action. You don't want to make sure they all have a lasting impression, because then the reader is going to be pulled in too many different directions. You're going to want to focus your character description attention onto those people that actually matter to the story. And that is why it's important to make sure that they leave an impression, because you want to make sure that the reader is keeping them in the back of their mind as they're progressing throughout the story, so that when that character comes up again or is super relevant to the plot again, you're not left wondering, oh, who is that? I don't remember. I have to go back a couple pages and figure out who that is. Part 3 is to make use of your narrator's lens. So your narrator or narrators, especially if you're writing deep third or first person, which are my two favorite POVs to write, they are going to be the lens through which you view every other character in the book most of the time. People are naturally very judgmental creatures, unless you're not, in which case that in of itself is like a character trait. Your narrator is probably going to make those like instant opinions on the people they encounter throughout the story, especially if they play some role in their lives or their arc or create conflict. The impressions that they form, the judgments that they make, they're all going to be colored by their personality and their experiences. For example, the main character of Moths is very, very judgmental because she is just like kind of an asshole, so she is judgmental of other people's appearance, of their status, and she tends to describe people based off of these like superficial things first. When talking about established characters in the narrative, as in like people she knows but we haven't met yet, I also use her lens to talk about their role to her, because she's very self-centered, so I talk about like their usefulness to her and their perceived rank in the context of the world and their skill set. Obviously, the main character of Moths is not the best person, but you know, we kind of love that. And this is a very negative example, but you can definitely use a positive one as well. This is also a great way to make sure that the character descriptions you write line up with the narrative voice that you've established throughout the rest of the story. I feel like I actually pretty often read books, published and unpublished, where the voice will be really strong and established, and then you'll hit some sort of descriptive chunk, especially of characters, and suddenly it'll be like she had brown hair and blue eyes and pale skin, and you're like, where did the voice go? Why is this suddenly a Wikipedia entry? I'm also guilty of this. It sometimes, you know, when I'm especially rough drafting, some of my descriptions sound like a grocery list, and you kind of want to avoid that. So making sure that you're using that narrative lens to capture the person through the narrator's eyes, if that makes sense, that is a really good way to maintain your voice. Part 4, what to avoid in character descriptions. So as I've alluded to before, I personally am just not a fan of the laundry list character descriptor style. I think it does have its time and place. I think there's definitely, like with everything, ways that you can use this effectively, but most of the time this does not work for me. While physical traits such as like eye color, skin color, hair color, etc., those are important to establish, they do not need to be dumped onto the page all at once when the character is first introduced. You can sort of gather those details throughout the story as you get to know the character a little bit more. Personally, when I meet people, I don't even really notice their eye color unless it's really striking. The first thing I'll notice usually about their like physical features is going to be something distinctive, or like their hair. In any case, these info dump type character descriptors will slow the pacing down, tend to read kind of clunky, clunky and awkward, and usually just don't stick in a reader's head anyway. Like at most they're gonna pick out 1 or 2 details to remember and the rest of it's just gonna go down the mind toilet. So instead of doing the laundry list, pick 1 or 2 physical traits that realistically stand out the most. For a lot of people, this is going to be eye color and hair color and maybe skin color, but honestly, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of reading about blue eyes and shit. I don't care. I would rather read about something more interesting. I love it when writers gravitate towards more uncommon or distinctive features, the things that really make a person's face stand out. Anyone can have a different eye color. The things that make a person stand out in like a police lineup or whatever are going to be very unique traits. So like asymmetrical features, old scars or birthmarks or moles, etc. Face shape, like a large forehead, a large chin, wide cheeks, scruffy facial hair, eczema. People are so much more than their hair color and eye color, I promise you. And honestly, this is one of my main issues with things like AI character generators. While I totally respect them as a tool for a lot of writers who need like a starting off point or need to visualize their characters, those generators tend to generate the same type of like sort of like anime face, like a very perfect face, and just change the hair and eye color. That is not what people look like. I've never met anyone who looks like that over the age of 13. What I like to do is study like actors, people in my real life who I know and love. I'll pick and choose a lot of like traits from the ones that I love and put them into the characters that I'm writing because I just like including those details. Dude, like romanticize your life by romanticizing the small things about the people around you that make them unique. You can also romanticize yourself, of course. That is also a very valid way to do it. I think just studying people in the real world and learning to identify and describe different traits is just going to make your descriptions so much stronger. Next thing, I think that when people use race and ethnicity as a character identifier too much, instead of actually like describing them as a person, it feels a little weird. If you feel so inclined, if it's like something that you do want to mention, which is absolutely fine, you can mention it like maybe once in the introduction, and then maybe a couple more times throughout the story itself if needed. I also think avoiding flat out stating the race in like a contemporary context or a historical one, if relevant, is also a little bit odd. I personally think it's kind of strange when an author, instead of saying like, oh, the Korean woman walked into the noodle shop with a machete in her fist, says like the petite, tan-skinned, dark-haired, almond-eyed woman walked into the noodle shop with a machete in her fist. I don't think this is necessarily the place to talk about describing the ethnicity of characters because that is a whole different thing, and personally I prefer to lean on cultural descriptions instead of like physical traits. But I just wanted to mention that, like, you really don't need to say it over and over again, and also you can just say it. My final note on things to avoid is too much metaphorical or figurative language. Honestly, this is one of the only scenarios in which I will say maybe back off on too much metaphorical and figurative language. As much as I love like beautiful, dense, rich, poetic prose, it can be very muddying in things like this where you're just trying to get an image into the reader's head. Of course, there are exceptions. There's always an exception. If someone is describing their partner very romantically, then, I mean, yeah, they're probably going to get a little bit flowery when describing that person's eyes. But at the end of the day, I do think a little goes a long way when it comes to character description. If you're writing a sentence like, her eyes were the same wispy color as a summer storm, what color is that? It can get distracting, it can get long-winded, and it can be confusing to the reader. And really most of the time for this like initial introduction, you just want to get your point across. And you can do it with fancy language, but just don't go on forever about the color of someone's eyes. So that is this video. This is a shorter one. I just kind of was inspired to talk about this topic because of my Discord chat. Let me know if you guys are interested in seeing more videos that are these like quick craft discussions in the future. I kind of like doing this. I don't really know what other topics I'd cover, but I'm very open to suggestions below. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye!